Hi, everybody. Well, we're here with Michael. Michael is from Chicago. We were talking about basketball. And well, Michael is a Microsoft MVP and partner at 8bot. He's here to talk about Reactive UI and Reactive Extensions for Xamarin.Forms. So very cool topic. I don't know, Nico, what else can you tell us?
Yeah, I think there's not much we need to introduce for Michael. He's a very big name, very well known in the community. So thank you for being here. We're really happy to have you, Michael. So it would be nice also if you can mention something about Aurora, which
sure.
I know it's quite a good thing. So awesome. Yeah, thanks for being here and all yours.
Awesome. Thanks. Yeah. Thanks so much for having me. This is, I know we were chatting a little bit beforehand, but it's been an awesome event so far. I think this is a great idea, just a great way to pull together Latin America for this. And yeah, super excited to be here. So thanks so much for having me again. Yeah, a little bit about myself. So I'm a partner at a company called 8bot, where we do Xamarin mobile development and Azure development primarily. So we help companies build mobile applications. And doing some of that, we've been at it since basically the beginning of Xamarin. And over time, we've built up our own control set using Skia Sharp. And so we've got our own tool set out here called Aurora Controls. You can check it out at auroracontrols.app if you're interested, but it's custom controls for Xamarin.Forms. Does all the other stuff that your designer asks you to do that maybe doesn't come out of the box. So if you want to get a hold of me or anything like that outside of here, if you want to yell at me about something or tell me how I'm wrong, you can jump onto Twitter and get me at Michael Stonis. So with that, let's jump into our topic today, which is Reactive UI. This is one of my most favorite things. And it's something I've talked a lot about. So you might have seen a previous presentation by me before, and hopefully you get something new out of this if you've seen it before. But, Reactive UI, if you're not familiar with it, it's something that was, it's a kind of an MVVM framework. I'm going to put it as a kind of, or a, sort of MVVM framework. Really what it is a set of tooling to help us build event-based applications, right? So when we think of event-based applications, that's, something for Xamarin.Forms. Maybe that's a UWP or a WPF app. It could be something like, native mobile, if you want to do Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android or anything like that. And it was originally created back in the day by Annie Betts to help with the, I think it was for the GitHub framework, GitHub desktop framework originally. But it's kind of spawned out from there, right? So it's sort of that framework for us to build on top of it. At the core of what Reactive UI is, it's sort of things to help us make our development life better, right? So we get an out-of-the-box view model component to build upon. We've got some platform wrappers. So things like doing button clicks or, listening for messages or notifications off of the system from iOS, for example. We've got nice ways to subscribe to those events that happen. There's a data binding engine. So if we want to glue up our view model components to our user interface, we've got kind of a nice way to do that. Commands. So, just again, our MVV, it's an MVVM framework. So it gives us the ability to work with commands and things like that. Some nice helpers for thread scheduling where we could tell it, hey, I want this work to occur on the user interface, or maybe I want some of this work to happen in a background thread. And while I keep my UI up and running and spinning and doing all that kind of good stuff. And then just a bunch of other helpers for doing, things like validation, additional event processing, logging. There's a built-in service locator, and we'll dive into most of that here in just a few. Unlike other MVVM frameworks, Reactive UI is kind of like the un-MVVM framework. If you really break it down, look at it, and take it for all of its, parts, it's kind of like some really nice, good implementations of things, like a really good implementation of command and a view model and stuff like that. And the rest of it is kind of like extension methods. Here's stuff that you could bolt on to your other framework and run around with. It's also not prescriptive. So what I mean by that is some MVVM frameworks say, you need to do this, followed by this, and it will work. And if you do anything different, well, it might not work out for you. Or it says, it must be implemented exactly like this for all the framework to work and everything like that. Reactive UI is kind of like you pick and choose what you want. If you want to use some parts out of it for the commands, you could just use that. If you wanted to just use the view model, you could do that. So it becomes kind of a hard thing to describe or a hard thing to totally show off, because if you talk to 5 different Reactive UI developers, you might get 5 different answers. The cool thing about it, though, is that even if you're using an MVVM framework today, something like Prism, for example, you could use Prism and Reactive UI together. They're like peanut butter and jelly, right? They're good apart, but they're better together. So, if you already have a framework that you've got today, consider taking some of this stuff, or giving it a shot. So with that, come on a journey with me and Dave Chappelle and Rick James as we dive in a little bit further into the moving parts and what is Reactive UI. Oops. There we go. There we are. So Reactive UI at its base is sort of 3 components. We have Reactive Extensions, a component called Splat, and dynamic data. Reactive Extensions, if you've never worked with it before, is a component that was built by Microsoft, over 10 years ago. And really what it's there to do is to give us a ability to manage streams inside of our applications. So everybody here, I'm going to guess, is probably familiar with Link, right? So if you've used Link before, you've got an IEnumerable or something like that you comb through and filter and process and send along its way. The idea here is that Reactive Extensions give us that same kind of functionality, but instead of being a pre-packaged deliverable like an IEnumerable or a list, we have a series of events that we can listen to and filter down. And I'll show an example here in just a moment. And it takes a lot of things that could be difficult to do in our traditional C# or event-based programming and makes them quite easy. Another thing about Reactive Extensions is if you live or work outside of the .NET ecosystem, Reactive Extensions are very popular in other languages like Swift. If you're doing iOS development out in the Android world, extremely popular. If you're doing any kind of web development, you've probably come across RxJS and other UI frameworks that use it. So it's a pretty neat thing. It's sort of a platform or language agnostic way to write some of this event handling code. And if we take a look at sort of what it looks like from a code perspective, you can see here, at the end of the day, it's basically Link for events. And so what I have in this example right here is an event, just a regular text entry event, or a text changed event rather, that comes from Xamarin.Forms. And you can see some things in here that maybe look familiar. In this case, we're going to create an observable. That's sort of the thing in the Reactive Extensions world that's going to push out notifications to us. But some of these commands might look familiar here, like select. We're going to take some of the data we're going to take the object that came out and just pull out some of the data. Or you might see the where statement out there, where we say we only want to do this if we meet a certain condition. Like in this case, if we actually have some text that came through, right? So if it's not null or white space. In addition, though, we get some things to help us process those events better. So you'll see that we've got this one command out here called throttle. So we could get an event in or get a series of events in, and we could basically say, don't notify me about this until 0.75 of a second later, right? So I don't want to know about this until the last changes come through, and then give me 3/4 of a second before you send this out to me. We also get some cool features out here like select many, which allows us to in line go do things like call async and await methods. So something that you can't, again, without some additional libraries, do out there for Link. And then there's a bunch of other stuff. These are just kind of high level things, but we could do cool things like explicit scheduling. I could tell this block of code here if I want parts of it to run on, in this example, on the user interface thread, or I could tell parts of it to run on a background thread so that, if we're doing something like calling an API or a database, it's just not doing all that work while our app sits stagnant. All right, so that's the first core piece that we have out there of Reactive UI. Next up is a service locator called Splat. So this isn't a dependency injection. You know, it's not like a big DI framework. It's not going to be, you know, what are your like traditional .NET, you know, IOC type dependency injection frameworks. It's really kind of a nice, lightweight service locator. It was built essentially to be fast, right? So the idea here is let's get something up and running, or let's locate our implementations for interfaces really quick so that we can get those up and running in our app kind of as fast as possible. So kind of geared towards being lightweight and well built for mobile. Our final component here is actually the newest piece of Reactive UI, and this is dynamic data. Dynamic data is awesome. I'm going to show a little bit of an example later. It's a very, very feature-rich component. It would take way more than 30 minutes probably just to go through dynamic data alone by itself. But if you think of what observable collections are, it is a observable collection. So meaning it will notify us when data goes into it, when data gets moved in it or removed from it or anything like that. But it is so much more. Really, really awesome. I want to call out too as well, you know, the reactive extensions, Splat, and dynamic data here are all independent components that you could use outside of Reactive UI as well. So even if you're just looking to have a really awesome implementation of observable collection, but you're maybe not, you know, sold on everything with Reactive UI, definitely recommend taking a look at dynamic data here. It is really cool. Right. So features. The best way I could think of showing this off here is showing what we can do in Reactive UI that is maybe above and beyond what you get out of the box from Forms. So as a consultant, we work with a lot of clients that have existing applications, clients that we're helping build new applications for. And so we see a lot of, different applications being built out there. And I want to throw a thing out here saying that basically going forward, some of the things I'm going to say are maybe opinion-based, but I think most of them are fact-based. So just a quick warning or heads up, that some of these things may be opinion-based of mine. So, but what we're going to do is we're going to compare what you get out of the box from Xamarin.Forms with what you get out of the box with Reactive UI. Right. So we think of, in terms of view models that you get out of the box with Xamarin.Forms, there really isn't one, right? We have bindable object, but that's for user interfaces. We really don't get a singular view model that comes with Xamarin.Forms, right? So it's likely something that you need to implement yourself. There's tons and tons of implementations out there, but if you wanted to roll it yourself, you would have to do something like implement iNotify property changed. A lot of times there's not a good way to prevent property notifications. So let's say that you need to go through and modify a bunch of properties, but you don't want the user interface to know. There may not be a good, safe way to turn that off while you're working on that. Things like error handling and maybe instrumentation also don't come out of the box. When we switch over to the Reactive UI world, though, we get this base view model called Reactive Object. Reactive Object comes with sort of everything that you need to get up and running and do stuff right. So it's got intelligent property change notifications, meaning if you've got properties and you set the same value twice, it's not going to go ahead and send that second change notification out there. We've got the ability to do things like suppress or delay change notifications. And I'll show an example of that here in just a few moments. We could do things like persist data as changes go through. So it's got the idea of sort of taking the state of the object and being able to save it off. And then we've got built-in logging support and error routing. Right? If we look at what Reactive Object looks like then, this is sort of a very, very simple view model, but it's a kind of a good illustration of what we could do out here. You'll notice in my properties, they're decorated with an attribute called reactive. Reactive UI comes with a package called, Fody.reactiveui or reactiveui.fody. I can't remember. Or reactiveui.propertychanged. It just blanked my name. Mine just blanked out. It'll come back to me. But there is a plugin package that essentially uses the Fody library to go through and dependency or at compile time, replace your properties with the reactive UI properties. So we've got kind of this real simple syntax for doing iNotify property change off of our properties here. And then we get some other cool features. For example, you'll notice I've got a property out here called formatted name. Now, formatted name, and this is something that I see pretty commonly, it's a string that needs to be built up out of two other properties in my view model. And so if you notice down here inside the constructor, there is a method call to this thing called a method called WhenAnyValue. It's an extension method called WhenAnyValue. And what that's going to do is it's going to listen to any property changes that come off of the first name and any property changes that come off of the last name. And anytime one of those two updates, what it will do is it'll run that string format down below. So you'll get last name, comma, first name, send it to a new property, and then that property will update. It's send out an update notification. So really helpful for doing things like if you're formatting, for currency, or if you're, pulling together names like that. Really nice stuff that we get out of the box for combining that data and ensuring that it's always fresh, right? We don't have to worry about doing anything in the setter of first name or last name. This will just listen to those changes and do that work for us. We also get some cool stuff here like SuppressChange notifications. So what I could do with SuppressChange notifications is say anything inside that using block, if I make that change, don't send out a notification, right? So if I'm doing this work here inside of there, don't do a notification. So at the end of that block, if I were to look at my property again, the name would still show as the last notification rather that would have gone out would have been for Michael, right? So I could keep that from maybe sending out too many notifications to my UI or something like that. What's probably more helpful than that though is DelayChange notifications. We see this a lot when we're working through something. Maybe we're getting data back from an API and we're going through and updating our view model, and we've got to update a whole bunch of properties. And typically what will happen is every time you make a change, it's going to push those through. What we could do here is with DelayChange notifications is we could make all those changes and then allow those change notifications to be pushed through at the end. So kind of get one batch of changes. And so our UI may update in just sort of one nice little update block there without a bunch of little changes along the way, right? So in this case, I'll get that Mike name change pushed out there as the last update. As I mentioned before too, then we've got the ability to do things like listen for exceptions. So Reactive Object has a property in there called thrown exceptions, and we could subscribe to that if there's any exceptions that are raised inside of our view model. So a great way to capture those things, log them, and do that. In addition to that, if we want to do any kind of instrumentation inside of our view model, we could call this.log. And then you've got your typical output logs, info, debug, warn, error, stuff like that, where we could start to capture those and then send them out to a logging provider, right? So you could send it out to some kind of structured logging or a logger implementation that you've put into your app. So really nice way to kind of have that out of the box for you. All right, next up, let's look at Xamarin.Forms commands. So the commands out of the box, again, not great support for async and await. No real great support for cancellation. They do offer some functionality for can execute, but it is a bit minimal. No typed input, no way to listen for completion on that command without having to add some additional work to it, right? If we look at the reactive command though, in my opinion, it's a really good implementation of iCommand. It allows us to do things like synchronous or asynchronous operations inside of our command. So we've got great support for that. It allows us to do things like cancel commands. So we've got the ability to send in a cancellation token into our command and stop operations in case something happens. Some really practical support for disabling commands. And that'll be best to show in just a moment here. But if you want to do something like while my command is running, disable it so that it can't run twice, or disable a command from running until you've maybe provided some crucial data, we could do that, and it's very easy. And it's got a really good integration with Xamarin.Forms. So let's take a look at what the definition for reactive command looks like. You can see that it has a typed input and output. I haven't gone into what unit is in terms of the Reactive Extensions world. You could kind of think of it as just a notification object though, right? It's basically just letting you know something happened. It's kind of like a void return method type, but it's sort of letting you know something occurred, right? And then here, so we're going to take in something. We really don't care what it is. That's really what unit means. And then at the output of our login, we're going to send a bool, right? So we're going to let us know, hey, I attempted to do something. Was it good? Was it bad? The implementation for our command looks a little bit like this then. So we've got Reactive Command, create from task. You can see that we're in our first parameter here. We're going to go ahead and, at the top here, we could say create from task, but we could also do things like tell it just to create, which would be synchronous. We could also create a task from other tasks, right? So it's kind of an interesting concept where you can chain tasks together to do work. The first parameter that I have in here is the actual work that I'll do. So you can see here, I'm doing some asynchronous operation to go process the login. And then finally, at the end of this, I'm going to return my result. The second parameter here is the control parameter. And this is going to control is executing. So basically what we're saying here is that this cannot run until I've received a username and a password, right? So this command will be disabled. It'll automatically turn itself on and off based on the parameters that I give it down here. Right. And at the end of the day, you'll end up with a UI that's a little bit like this. So if you keep your eye on the login button at the bottom there, notice how it's grayed out. As soon as I type in my password, notice how the login button enables. So it's disabled, re-enabled there. Also, reactive commands disable while they're running. So you'll notice again that that login button is automatically disabled. I didn't have to write any additional code. I didn't have to do anything out there. That's all sort of built right out of the box. Awesome functionality. I think it's just a great thing that saves my butt from people, smushing on that login button, trying to tap it a million times. It sort of handles that for you right out of the box. Next up, let's talk about Xamarin.Forms bindings. Now bindings, don't get me wrong, they're definitely getting better. If you saw Brandon's presentation earlier, where he's using the C# for the C# markup for bindings, that implementation is awesome. I do love it quite a bit. But for anybody who's done any XAML or has done any binding work in Forms before, you probably love value converters. You've got your inverse bool value converter and all those good things. Tons of stuff that, a lot of code that you have to run out there. Sometimes with bindings, you don't know what the default binding mode is. Is it a two-way binding? Is it a one-way binding? It's up to the control, and maybe it's not exactly apparent what it might be out there. There's no way to really do any event binding to a command. So, some controls may have a default command, like a button click, for example. When you click, it's going to bind that to a command. But some controls have multiple different events that come off of them, and not every control is going to give you the ability to do a command and a command parameter for all those different events. So there's no exact way to kind of do that out of the box, right? And then you can't batch bindings. This one's going to sound funny, and I'll show an example of this to kind of explain it. But, if you get one object in, say I receive in an employee object or a person object, I'm probably going to want to go and update my UI, where I need to go and maybe update my UI for every single property on that person, right? I got to do their name and address and things like that. Typically, you would do that all with individual bindings, and it could be kind of a performance issue. And so there's no great way to batch those up. And finally, we just can't complete them. Or we can't listen to the completion of those bindings. All that stuff that I mentioned there, we get kind of out of the box with Forms, with Reactive UI. We've got two-way, one-way bindings. Type conversion is extremely straightforward, very similar to what you see in that C# markup language, where we could sort of do inline binding conversion out there. We can control when our bindings update our source. So if we want to delay an update, maybe we want to do something like delay updating our binding until somebody has left a form field. It's very easy to do. And this is something, this last point that I have on here is, I think, very cool in that the Xamarin.Forms bindings work for Xamarin.Forms, but they don't really leave that platform. Reactive UI, since it's not built specifically for Xamarin.Forms, that binding engine works whether you're in Forms, native iOS, Android, WPF, kind of like anywhere and everywhere. So if you need to go and work in a different platform, the knowledge that you got here should carry on over there. Okay, Just kind of look at a very high level of some bindings, right? You could see the way the binding engine works is you take in the first parameter, which is your view model, the second parameter, which is your property that you want to listen to, and then finally that third parameter out there, which is where we want to go update our UI. So the first one is going to be a two-way binding, second one a one-way binding, and then finally the one on the bottom there is how we bind up commands. What you can also do, though, is we can listen for property changes, and we can do some work based on those property changes out here for Reactive UI to manipulate data and then glue it up to our user interface. So in this case, I'm looking for something like an isValid property, right? It's just a Boolean property, we'll say. And basically, if it is valid, I want my user interface to be green or red. Well, I could do that right here, sort of in line with this nice link-like syntax where I say, what's my current state of isValid? Go grab some color, red or green. I could tell it to push this change or send it, basically schedule this change on a user interface. That's what that observe on main thread scheduler means. So anything below that is going to happen on the user interface thread. And then finally, I could tell it to bind it to my background color. Additionally, what we could do is we could listen to changes that happen from observables. And in our case, a reactive command is also an observable. So here, if I were to cancel processing in my application, I could listen to that change. Again, I could do something on my main thread scheduler, and I could do something like show an alert out there. So kind of a cool thing. You know, we could listen to property changes. We could listen to control state changes, all those kinds of good things. And this is my example for batch updates. So say, for example, here I have an object called load, and I want to go and update a whole bunch of properties at once. Basically, what I could do here is listen for when that value comes in. And then I could, instead of pushing the, queuing up all these changes on my user interface thread, I could basically build up a big batch of changes, push them out to the user interface thread in one big push, and kind of get a better user experience out there, or maybe get some nicer loading into my user interface. Okay, out of the box, observable collection for forms. It's pretty bare bones. I usually think of it as the sledgehammer approach to updates. You can't do things like an add range or things like that. You do get your updates out there for, insert updates and deletes. And there's really nothing built in there for filtering or transformation. Now, dynamic data, like I mentioned before, is sort of the superhero version of that observable collection. We've got super granular controls for change notifications. We've got inline ability to filter our data. Maybe we don't want certain values to come through. We could transform our data, sort it, aggregate it, do things like counts to it, all built in. And it's extremely optimized and very fast, right? So this was originally built to help support some, highly transactional data. And so, performance on this is pretty fantastic. So if you look at what dynamic data lists kind of look like, you'll notice that they kind of get set up here very similar like we've seen with our other components from Reactive UI. You'll notice that we have to, we'll create our list up on the top here. That first line is where we connect, basically saying that we want to listen for updates. We could do things like buffer up changes, which is pretty neat. So if we haven't met a certain condition, we could suppress change notifications until that condition is met. We could tell it to group data, transform data, right? So we could take data and repackage it to push it down the line, sort inline, all that kind of good stuff. Binding. It's extremely, like I mentioned, it's extremely efficient, extremely powerful observable collection management. This last thing that I want to show off here is something that doesn't really exist in Forms and is kind of best shown by itself. So if we take a look at this video here, this is a pretty common use case that I see where something happens, right? So we've got a search that occurs and maybe a network error happens, right? So how do I manage that from my view model, right? I'm probably calling the network, inside of my view model. I get this exception that occurs, but then I need to tell the user interface or notify to the user interface, hey, do you want to retry this or get some feedback from the user? And so the way that we could do that here inside of Reactive UI is using this object called an interaction. So an interaction gives us a way from our view model to reach out to some outside process, get some feedback, and then await for it to come back, right? So as we saw in our example there, we have that alert dialog. Our users can choose to accept or reject it. We're going to get that value back, and then we're going to continue along our way. Everything's typed data, so the data that we send out and the data that we get back is typed. And because this doesn't have a specific implementation for a user interface, you can mock out this whole workflow in a unit test and stuff like that as well. If we look at the implementation of it here quick, the setup is very similar to our reactive command, where we say that we're going to send out some string data and we're going to receive in a Boolean value. When we want to do this, inside of our view model, we're going to say, if our interaction is called workflow confirmation here, we're going to call .handle, and then we're going to send our string out. So we're going to say, are you sure you want to go do that work? Out in our user interface or somewhere else, doesn't have to be in the user interface, we're going to register a handler. And this handler then is going to say, all right, maybe I need to show a user interface component or do some asynchronous work. Let's get that value or get the feedback from the user. Let's set that output. And then when we set the output, it'll bring us back here to our await command, which is pretty cool. All right. I know that's very high level. I know we kind of go fast here. We got just a short period of time, but if you are interested in Reactive Command, or if any of that sounded interesting to you, I highly recommend picking up UI and Reactive UI. It's a great book written by one of the community members, one of the maintainers, Kent. Fantastic book that goes through everything in it. I really, really highly recommend going through it. Also want to send a quick shout out to the Reactive UI team. People like Glenn and Rodney are out there doing a ton of great work for this project and putting in the effort. So huge shout out to them. None of this would be capable or would be happening without their input and without them doing that. So with that, hopefully you learned a little bit about Reactive UI. Hopefully you got a little bit more familiar with reactive extensions and some of those cool components that you could use in your forms or other applications. So yeah, thanks again for joining, everybody. Let me check the output here. Hey, Nico.
Yes. So this is great presentation. Thank you, Michael. So we had quite good feedback about Reactive UI. And yeah, so we don't really have much questions, but we have tons of good feedback. I do have one question for you, though.
Cool.
So we have Maui, right?
Mm-hmm.
And Maui will support MVU. So what does MVUs mean to Reactive UI? How do you see that?
Yeah, we've been talking about that a little bit. I mean, the thing is, I don't know that, like an MVU architecture, that it is exactly as is today the right fit, right? Because MVU, or Reactive UI is kind of built to fit that MVVM style where we've got commands, we've got, things like that are sort of tightly bolted into the user interface. We got all the binding and everything like that. But outside of that, we still are going to have to deal with a lot of those same problems. It might not be a view model. It might be something else where we have to deal with like state change in management, right? And so, we might have to click a button, and once that button clicks, instead of just inline updating it in the MVU UI, we may need to go do some work, wait for that to finish, and then go and push an update to the UI. So I think, again, like I said, it's something that I've been talking with the team there a little bit. I think that it will be something that we need to transition to, or something that it needs to be transitioned to a little bit. But a lot of those core components, the reactive object functionality, a lot of those extensions, whether you're doing MVU or kind of any kind of event-based code, you could sort of pick that in and, pick that up and use it for where you need to do that, that sort of event-based lifting. So.
Right. Yeah. So talking about different kind of production apps, is there any kind of app that you would say in this app, well, I wouldn't really recommend Reactive UI, and if there's any kind of apps where you would, of course, say differently, or if it's how do you see it?
In my opinion, you're insane not to use it. Just kidding. Just kidding.
It was the answer I was hoping to.
If it all comes down to comfort and familiarity, to be perfectly clear and honest, Reactive Extensions does have a learning curve. It's not something that your team probably will pick up in a day or even an afternoon, right? It is something that you have to invest time on. Now, with that being said, just like when the first time I learned LINQ, I looked at it and I was like, why would I use LINQ? Like I could just write a for loop and do all this work. And now going back, however many years it's been, 15 years or something, I'm like, how do I ever live without LINQ? These people are insane not to use it, right? So if your team maybe, doesn't have the ability to put in that investment right away to learn the technology, it might not be great. But the cool part is, again, sort of like I mentioned there, it's a pick and choose for what you want to use. It's not an all-in thing. So even if you're not comfortable with it, you don't have to change your whole framework. You don't have to rip out what you're doing today. If you just have one small use case where you're like, we've got to do the search implementation and I want to throttle the search, just pick it off and use it there, right? You could kind of, sort of work your way into it, which is cool.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome. And I think it also plays very well with other frameworks, right? Like MVVM Cross or Prism.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, Prism, MVVM Cross, everything's expecting property change notifications and commands. All Reactive UI is doing is property change notifications and commands, right? So if you want to just build it in and just have it send out those same change notifications, or have it maybe, use the reactive command instead of the command that comes with Prism or something like that, you could pick and choose, what you want to use. And so again, it's sort of like it always comes back to me to be my hammer. Whenever I'm like, I got to solve a problem, I'm always like, this is the hammer that'll solve it. And it always seems to work. So it's a good hammer.
It doesn't happen with every technology they learn. So that's pretty awesome. Okay, so let me look at the chat again. So we have, for example, Brandon, who was mentioning that, this would have been nice to have seen this maybe before. So would you recommend how easy it is then to, so say I have my existing app, it's been around for like 5 years. And so how easy is it to bring React UI to it? Yeah,
I mean, at a minimum, just go out there. It's all NuGet packages. So just go grab the Reactive UI NuGet packages, choose your platform. If you're doing forms or if you're doing something else, grab, and there's packages for each platform. So, whether you're doing native Xamarin or if you're doing Xamarin.Forms, you've got all that. And then just pull in the component that you need. So like I mentioned, if it's, say you've got a command, you've got some command operation where you want to add in some retry logic, and you want to have it like it's that login page that I showed you. Maybe you want to have it automatically disable when you don't have the username and password in there. You could just implement that one reactive command in your existing view model. Reactive command is just an implementation of iCommand. So the user interface knows how to work with it. Everything else knows how to call it. You could call .execute on it, send in your parameters, and everything kind of just works as is. So, you could, like I said, you could really just find a good use case and then bring it in for that one use case there.
Excellent. This really sounds like two good notes to dive into. So yeah, thank you again, Michael.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're really, really happy to have you here, and to
Thanks
be part of the event.
Yeah, this is a great event. I'll be hanging around here for a while. Again, if anybody has any questions for me or anything, you can come grab me on Twitter. Tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why I'm right. But usually people telling me why I'm wrong. So
No, I don't think so. But yeah.
But again, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you.
Awesome.